wearing a dress from a thrift store, with $12 to her name and no lawyer. Her husband's mistress was sitting in the front row in a $10,000 Chanel coat, wearing the diamond earrings that belonged to Sarah's dead grandmother. Smirking, like she had already won, and honestly, she had every reason to smirk. Richard Sterling was worth $18 million. He had the most ruthless divorce attorney in Seattle. He had hidden the money in 3 shell companies across 2 countries. He had faked evidence, calling his own pregnant wife an alcoholic. He had bribed witnesses. He had gotten her lawyer disqualified. He had even gotten a judge who played golf with his attorney assigned to the case. Sarah had nothing. No money, no lawyer, no friends. She had not spoken to her own father in 10 years because the last time she saw him, she told him she hated him. But here is what Richard Sterling did not know. He did not know that Sarah's father changed his last name 20 years ago. He did not know that the quiet old man sitting in the back row of the courtroom was watching every single word. And he definitely did not know that the father-in-law he had never bothered to meet was one of the most powerful judges in the state. Richard thought he had already won. He thought his pregnant wife would crawl away with nothing. He was wrong. And what happened next destroyed him. This story is a reminder that the people who love you will wait for you, even when you push them away. It is proof that the system, when the right people fight hard enough, can still deliver justice. And it is a warning to anyone who confuses someone's kindness for weakness. Because the quietest person in the room might be the one holding all the cards. If you believe that karma always finds a way, hit that like button right now. If you know someone who needs to hear this story today, share it with them. And drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in that hospital bed? Would you have signed those papers for $25,000? Or would you have kept fighting? I want to hear your answer. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Because trust me, next week's story is even wilder. Now let us go back to the beginning. 3 weeks before the trial, a rainy morning in Seattle, and a pregnant woman standing on marble steps with nowhere to go. She walked into that courtroom wearing a dress she bought at a thrift store, while her husband's mistress sat in the front row draped in a $10,000 Chanel coat, smirking like she had already won. And honestly, everyone thought she had. Richard Sterling had the best lawyers money could buy. He had hidden the assets, forged the documents, and bought the narrative. He thought his pregnant wife, Sarah, was just a helpless woman he could throw away like a used napkin. But Richard made one fatal mistake, a mistake that would cost him his empire, his reputation, and his freedom. He did not check the name on the judge's bench. He had no idea that the man holding the gavel was the father-in-law he had never bothered to meet. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Richard Sterling lost everything, we need to go back 3 weeks. To a rainy morning in Seattle. To a pregnant woman standing on marble steps with $12 to her name and nowhere to go. 3 weeks earlier. The rain in Seattle always felt like it was trying to wash the city clean, but on the morning of October 14th, it just felt cold. Sarah Sterling stood on the marble steps of the sprawling estate in Medina, the water soaking through her thin cardigan. Behind her, the heavy oak doors she had polished, doors she had decorated with wreaths every Christmas for 7 years, slammed shut with a finality that echoed in her chest. She was 7 months pregnant. Her hand rested on her belly, and beneath her palm, the baby kicked. It was the only warm thing in her entire world. Minutes earlier, the humiliation had been absolute. Richard Sterling stood in the foyer of the home she had helped pay for, checking his Rolex. He did not look at her. He looked through her, the way you look through a window that needs cleaning. The driver will take you to the motel on 4th. His voice carried no emotion. It was a business transaction. My lawyers have already sent the paperwork. Do not make a scene, Sarah. It is embarrassing. Standing next to him, gripping Richard's arm with a manicured hand, was Jessica Vane. Jessica was 26 years old, a former marketing intern at Sterling Properties who had climbed the corporate ladder not by merit, but by proximity. She was wearing Sarah's grandmother's diamond earrings, the ones Richard had given Sarah for their 5th anniversary, antique cut, 1.5 carats each. They had belonged to Sarah's grandmother, Eleanor, who had received them from Sarah's father decades ago. Jessica did not try to hide them. She tilted her head, catching the light from the chandelier, making sure Sarah saw the diamonds dangling from her ears. It was deliberate. It was cruel. And it worked. You left your keys on the table, sweetie, Jessica cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She picked up the brass keyring and dropped it onto the marble floor near Sarah's feet. We are changing the locks at noon anyway, but Richard prefers a clean break. Sarah did not scream. She did not cry. She felt a numbness spreading from her fingertips to her core, a defense mechanism against the sheer brutality of the moment. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if protesting on her behalf. 7 years. 7 years she had given this man. She had supported Richard when Sterling Properties was just a risky startup operating out of their 2-bedroom apartment. She had signed the business loans with her own credit when every bank in Seattle turned him away. She had done the books at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. She had worked the phones, charmed the early investors, nursed Richard through his stress-induced ulcers, and covered for his drunken outbursts at industry galas by telling everyone he was just passionate. She had built Sterling Properties alongside him. Her name was on the original incorporation papers filed with the state of Washington. Sarah Bennett Sterling, co-founder and chief financial officer. Richard had removed her from the company website 2 years ago. He had taken her off the board of directors. He had told their social circle she was just a housewife who did not understand business. But the state filing was still there. Her signature was still on the original loans. You can erase someone from a website, but you cannot erase them from the public record. Not that any of that mattered right now. Right now, Sarah was standing in the rain, pregnant, penniless, and being replaced by a 26-year-old intern wearing her dead grandmother's jewelry. Richard, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She hated how small she sounded. I signed the prenup because I trusted you. You said it was just for the board. You said it would never be used against me. You said... I said a lot of things. Richard cut her off. He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. There was no guilt. No hesitation. No flicker of the man she had married. His gaze was reptilian, calculating. He was looking at her the way he looked at a property he was about to demolish. People change, Sarah. Business models evolve. You are an obsolete asset. Jessica is the future. Now get out before I call security. Obsolete asset. He called her an obsolete asset. His pregnant wife, the mother of his unborn child. The woman who had signed her name next to his when nobody else in the world believed in him. Jessica leaned into Richard's side, her hand sliding possessively up his arm. She looked at Sarah the way a cat looks at a mouse. It is already caught, but is not yet killed. There was amusement in her eyes, satisfaction, and something else. A cruelty so casual, it was almost bored. Sarah turned and walked down the marble steps into the rain. She did not look back. She could not. Because if she looked back, she would see the life she had built disappearing behind a closing door, and she was not sure she could survive that image. The driver, a man named Carl who had worked for the Sterlings for 3 years and who could not meet Sarah's eyes, held the car door open. He drove her, in silence, to the Starlight Motor Inn on 4th Avenue. The motel was Richard's final insult. It was a roadside inn with stained carpets and a flickering neon sign. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. The bedspread had a cigarette burn near the pillow. The bathroom faucet dripped with a rhythmic persistence that sounded like a clock counting down to something terrible. This was where Richard Sterling sent the woman who helped build his fortune. This was the room he chose for his pregnant wife while he slept in silk sheets in their 5,000 square foot home with his 26-year-old mistress. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. She placed her hands on her belly. The baby moved, a slow roll, as if settling in for the night. "It is just you and me now," Sarah whispered to her stomach. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the faucet drip, and trying to understand how her life had come apart so completely. Her bank accounts were frozen. She had discovered this when she tried to buy a sandwich at the gas station next to the motel. Card declined. She tried the second card. Declined. She tried the third. Declined. Richard's legal team had moved fast. Conrad Archer, the lead attorney at Archer and Associates, was known in Seattle legal circles as the Butcher of Bellevue. He was undefeated in high-asset divorce cases, and his strategy was always the same: total annihilation. He did not just win divorces. He destroyed the other side so completely that they could never recover. Within 48 hours of the eviction, Archer had filed a blizzard of motions. He painted Sarah as mentally unstable and alcoholic. He claimed she was a spendthrift who had squandered marital funds. He submitted doctored receipts showing purchases Sarah had never made. He included photographs of Sarah looking disheveled and exhausted, photographs taken during a week she had the flu, and presented them to the court as evidence of her inability to care for herself. It was a total demolition job, and Sarah had no lawyer, no money, and no one to call. For 3 days, she lay in the dark motel room. She ate what she could afford, which was not much: a package of crackers from the vending machine, a cup of soup from the microwave in the motel lobby, water from the bathroom tap. On the 4th day, Sarah ran out of money. She had $12 left. And then the cramping started. The pain hit her at 3 in the morning. It started as a dull ache in her lower back, something she might have dismissed as the general discomfort of being 7 months pregnant in a motel bed with springs that poked through the mattress. But then it sharpened. It moved to her abdomen. It tightened like a fist around her belly, and Sarah gasped, rolling onto her side, clutching her stomach with both hands. No, 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 no. Not now. Please, not now. She had not eaten properly in 36 hours. She had barely slept. The stress of the eviction, the frozen accounts, the legal filings accusing her of being an unfit human being, all of it had been pressing down on her body like a weight she could not shift. And now her body was telling her it had had enough. Sarah fumbled for her phone on the nightstand. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped it twice. She dialed 911. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. The EMTs found her curled on the motel bed, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed against her belly, the other gripping the phone like a lifeline. They loaded her onto a stretcher and drove her through the rainy Seattle streets to Harborview Medical Center. In the emergency room, Dr. Helen Ramos took over. Dr. Ramos was in her early 50s, calm and precise, with the kind of voice that made you believe Everything might actually be okay, even when the monitors were beeping too fast. Sarah, I need you to listen to me, Doctor, Ramos said, holding Sarah's hand while a nurse attached the fetal monitor. Your baby is showing signs of distress. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you are severely dehydrated. We are going to stabilize you, but I need you to tell me what has been going on. Sarah told her. She told her about the eviction, the motel, the $12, the frozen accounts, the prenup, the fabricated evidence. She told her about Richard and Jessica and the diamond earrings, and the way Richard had called her an obsolete asset. She told her everything in a rush of words and tears because Dr. Ramos was the first person in 4 days who had looked at her like she was a human being. Dr. Ramos listened without interruption. When Sarah finished, the doctor squeezed her hand. We are going to take care of you and this baby. That is my job. But Sarah, the stress you are under, it is not sustainable. If your cortisol levels stay this high, you risk preterm labor. You need rest, nutrition, and support. Do you have family? Anyone we can call? Sarah shook her head. She thought of the friends who had already blocked her number to stay on Richard's good side. She thought of the distant cousins who would not understand. She thought of her father, and the thought was so painful she pushed it away immediately. The hospital called Richard as next of kin. It was standard procedure. Sarah lay in the bed, hooked to an IV and a fetal monitor, listening to the steady whoosh whoosh of her baby's heartbeat, and she waited. Some small, stupid part of her, some part that still remembered the man she had married, thought maybe Richard would come. Maybe hearing that his pregnant wife was in the hospital would crack through the ice. The response came 2 hours later. It was not from Richard. It was from Conrad Archer's office. The message, relayed by a hospital administrator who could barely look Sarah in the eye, read as follows. Mrs. Sterling's medical issues are not Mr. Sterling's financial concern. Please direct all billing to her personally. Sarah stared at the administrator. The woman looked like she wanted to apologize on behalf of the entire male species. That is what he said? Sarah asked. The administrator nodded. I am sorry, Mrs. Sterling. Sarah turned her head to the wall. She did not cry. She was past crying. She was in a place beyond tears, a hollow space where the only sound was her baby's heartbeat and the drip of the IV. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days. During that time, a nurse named Linda did something that Sarah would never forget. Linda was in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She had seen hundreds of patients come and go, and she had developed a sixth sense for the ones who were truly alone. On the morning Sarah was to be discharged, Linda came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Honey, I know this is none of my business, but I have been a nurse for 22 years, and I know what financial abuse looks like. And I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are not unstable. You are a woman in a bad situation, and bad situations end. Sarah looked at her. She wanted to believe it. Linda reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a receipt. I covered your discharge paperwork. Do not argue with me. It is done. Sarah opened her mouth to protest. Linda held up a hand. My daughter went through something similar 3 years ago. Somebody helped her when nobody else would. I am paying it forward. You just promise me you will fight. Not for that man. For that baby. Sarah nodded. She could not speak, but she took Linda's kindness and held it inside her chest like a candle in the dark. It was small, it was fragile, but it was light. She left the hospital in the same clothes she had arrived in. She took a bus back to the Starlight Motor Inn. She sat on the bed, her hand on her belly, and she thought about what Linda had said. Bad situations end, but how? She had no money, no lawyer, no friends, no family, no family. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather-bound address book. It was old, the cover cracked and soft from years of handling. She had carried it with her through every move, every apartment, every house. She had never thrown it away, even though most of the numbers inside were disconnected or belonged to people who no longer wanted to hear from her. She turned the pages slowly. Past the friends who had blocked her, past the cousins who lived in other states and other lives, past the colleagues who had sided with Richard because Richard was the one with the checkbook. She stopped at a name written in precise cursive ink, Arthur, her father. She had not spoken to him in 10 years. The last time she saw him was the day before her wedding to Richard. Arthur had driven to her apartment, unannounced, still wearing his suit from the courthouse. He had stood in her living room, his face drawn with worry, and he had said the words that Sarah had spent a decade trying to forget. "Sarah, please, I am begging you, do not marry this man. I have seen men like him my entire career. He is a charlatan in a cheap suit. He is a soul sucker. He will take everything from you, and when there is nothing left to take, he will throw you away." Sarah, 21 years old and drunk on love, had exploded. She screamed that she hated him. She called him a bitter, controlling old man who could not stand to see his daughter happy. She told him he was jealous because her mother had died and he had never moved on. She said things so cruel that even now, 10 years later, they made her sick to remember. Arthur had stood there and taken it. He did not yell back. He did not threaten. He simply nodded, put on his coat, and walked to the door. "When you need me," he had said quietly, without turning around, "I will be here." Then he left, and Sarah changed her number, and she never looked back. Richard, in his monumental arrogance, never asked about Sarah's family again. On one of their early dates, Sarah had mentioned that her father was a lawyer in the public sector. Richard had laughed and said, "So, a nobody." And that was the end of it. To Richard, Sarah's family was irrelevant. They were poor or trashy or dead. He did not care which. He never investigated. He never asked, because narcissists do not investigate the people they consider beneath them. And that was Richard Sterling's fatal mistake. Sarah stared at the name in the address book. Her hand trembled. 10 years of silence, 10 years of guilt and pride and stubbornness. She had told this man she hated him. She had cut him out of her life as cleanly as a surgeon removing a tumor. And now she was sitting in a motel room with $12 and a baby who might come too early and a husband who had called her an obsolete asset. She dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Chambers of Justice Pendleton," a stern female voice answered. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "I need to speak to the judge. Please tell him it is Sarah." There was a long pause. Sarah could hear the faint sounds of a busy office. Phones ringing, papers shuffling, the distant echo of a courtroom gavel. One moment. When the voice came back on the line, it was not the secretary. It was a deep, gravelly baritone that Sarah had not heard since the day before her wedding. A voice that had once read her bedtime stories. A voice that had once called her his best girl. A voice that had spent 10 years waiting for this phone call. Sarah. One word, her name, and everything broke. The tears she had held back in front of Richard and Jessica and the hospital administrators and the motel clerk and the bus driver, all of them burst forth in a flood that she could not control and did not try to. "Daddy." She sobbed, her voice cracking like thin ice. "Daddy, you were right. You were right about everything." The chambers of the Honorable Arthur Pendleton were a fortress of solitude and history. Mahogany bookshelves lined every wall. filled with legal volumes dating back to the 1950s. The carpet was dark green and thick enough to muffle footsteps. The window offered a view of the stone pillars of the state superior court, rain-streaked and imposing. On the desk, beside a brass lamp and a fountain pen that Arthur had used to sign every ruling for the past 20 years, sat a framed photograph. The photograph showed a teenage girl in a graduation cap, beaming at the camera, her arm thrown around the neck of a younger, less gray man in a dark suit. The girl was Sarah. The man was Arthur. It was taken 18 years ago, the day Sarah graduated high school, the last era of their lives, when everything between them was simple and good. The photograph had not moved in 10 years. Arthur Pendleton was not just a judge. In the legal community of Washington State, he was a legend. They called him the Iron Gavel. He was known for his terrifying intellect, his zero tolerance for theatrics, and his absolute, almost mechanical adherence to justice. He had once held a CEO in contempt of court for checking his watch during a sentencing. He had once reduced a defense attorney to tears with a single question. He was feared by litigators, respected by his peers, and avoided at cocktail parties because he had a habit of asking uncomfortable questions and then waiting in silence for the answer. He was also a man who had spent the last decade eating dinner alone in a house that was too quiet, staring at a phone that never rang, wondering if he would ever hear his daughter's voice again. When Sarah walked into his chambers, Arthur did not stand immediately. It was not coldness. It was self-preservation. He needed a moment to absorb what he was seeing. He saw the cheap clothes, a cardigan with a small hole in the elbow, a maternity blouse that had been washed so many times the color was fading. He saw the hollow cheeks. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of nights without sleep. He saw the pregnant belly, round and full, and carrying his grandchild. A grandchild he had not known existed until 30 minutes ago on the phone. And he saw the way Sarah held her left arm close to her body, as if protecting herself from a blow. It was a posture Arthur had seen hundreds of times in his courtroom, on the bodies of women who had been made small by the people who were supposed to love them. The anger he had carried for 10 years, the anger at Sarah for leaving, at Sarah for choosing that flashy hustler over her own blood, at Sarah for saying she hated him, all of it evaporated in an instant. It burned away like morning fog, and what was left underneath was the thing that had always been there, the thing that never changed, the protective instinct of a father. "Sit," Arthur said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. Sarah sat. She told him everything. She did not sugarcoat her own stupidity. She did not make excuses. She admitted she had signed the prenup without reading the fine print because Richard had told her it was just a formality for the board of directors. She admitted she had let Richard put all the assets in his name because he said it was better for tax purposes. She admitted she had alienated every friend and family member who tried to warn her because she was too proud and too in love to listen. "He has Archer and Associates," Sarah finished, wiping her eyes with a rough paper towel from the dispenser on Arthur's credenza. "They are going to bury me, Dad. They have fake affidavits saying I am crazy and alcoholic. Richard bribed the housekeeper and the gardener to testify against me. They doctored photos. They fabricated receipts. I have nothing. I do not even have a lawyer. I do not even have a place to live. I am in a motel, Dad. A motel with stained carpets and a broken lock on the door. I am 7 months pregnant and I have $12. Arthur listened without interruption. His face remained unreadable throughout. He was a man who had spent 40 years training his face to reveal nothing. And right now, That training was the only thing keeping him from standing up and driving to Richard Sterling's penthouse and doing something he would spend the rest of his life in prison for. When Sarah finished, Arthur leaned back in his chair and tinted his fingers. He was quiet for a long time. "Richard Sterling," he said finally, pronouncing the name the way you might pronounce the name of a disease. "I have seen his name in the system. Zoning violations, labor disputes, a complaint from a subcontractor that was settled out of court. He thinks the law is a suggestion. He thinks he owns the law," Sarah corrected quietly. "He told me, Dad, his exact words. He said, 'I know the system, Sarah. I have already greased the wheels. The judge will sign whatever I put in front of him.'" Arthur's eyes changed. They went from warm to cold in the space of a heartbeat. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah had seen that look once before, when she was 12 and a boy at school had pushed her down on the playground. Arthur had gone to the school the next day, and whatever he said to the principal, the boy never bothered Sarah again. "He said that," Arthur repeated. "Those were his exact words." Arthur stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the rain and the stone pillars and the American flag hanging limp and wet in the courtyard. He stood there for nearly a minute, his hands clasped behind his back. Then he turned around. "Sarah," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I am about to say is the most important thing I will ever tell you." Sarah straightened in her chair. "I cannot help you with this case." Arthur's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the strain beneath it. "Not as a judge, not in any official capacity. If anyone discovers that I am your father and that I have interfered in any way, Richard's lawyers will use it to throw out your entire case. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every motion, all of it gets tossed. Richard walks free, and everything you have suffered will have been for nothing." Sarah felt the hope that had been building in her chest begin to deflate. "But," Arthur continued, holding up a hand, "I am not just a judge. I am also a father with 40 years of connections in the legal community. And what a father can do is make a phone call." Arthur picked up his phone. He made 2 calls. The first was to the Legal Aid Society. Arthur knew the director, a woman named Catherine Marsh, from their years on the State Bar Ethics Committee together. He told her he had become aware of a pro bono case involving severe financial abuse in a high-asset divorce. He said the defendant was pregnant, destitute, and facing a team of predatory attorneys. He asked Catherine to assign her best financial abuse specialist. Catherine assigned Maggie Lawson. The second call was to the Women's Financial Justice Network, a nonprofit that provided forensic accounting services to abuse victims. Arthur had served on their advisory board years ago. He asked them to assign a forensic accountant to trace hidden assets in a divorce case. They assigned David Torres. Arthur hung up the phone. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a personal checkbook. He wrote a check for $5,000 and slid it across the desk to Sarah. "Buy a proper suit," he said. "Not flashy, dignified. Look like a woman who is holding on to her dignity, because that is exactly what you are." Sarah took the check. Her hands were shaking. Arthur sat down across from her. He reached over and took both of her hands in his. His hands were warm and rough and strong, and they felt exactly the way she remembered from when she was a little girl, and he would walk her across busy streets, holding her hand so tightly that she never once felt afraid. "Sarah, I cannot be in that courtroom with you. I cannot be your lawyer. I cannot be your judge. I cannot be anything but your father who loves you. And I need you to know that what I am doing right now, these 2 phone calls, this check, this is all I can do. After today, I cannot contact you about the case. I cannot review documents. I cannot advise you on strategy. If they connect us, it is over. I understand, Sarah whispered. You are going to fight this yourself. You are going to let Maggie and David do their work. You are going to trust the system, not because it is perfect, but because it is all we have. Can you do that? Sarah nodded. And Dad? She asked. What will you do? Arthur looked at the photograph on his desk. The smiling teenage girl. The last good day. I will be in the gallery, he said quietly, watching. That is all a father can do sometimes. Sarah stood up. She walked around the desk and hugged her father for the first time in 10 years. He held her carefully, mindful of the belly between them, and he smelled the same way he always had, like old books and coffee and the specific warmth of a man who had been her entire world before she decided the world was bigger than he was. I am sorry, Daddy, Sarah said into his shoulder. I am sorry for what I said. I am sorry for leaving. I am sorry for 10 years. Arthur pulled back. He held her face in his hands, the way he used to when she was small and crying. You are here now, he said. That is all that matters. Sarah left the courthouse through a side entrance. She walked into the rain, and for the first time in weeks, the cold did not bother her. She had a check in her pocket, 2 names written on a piece of paper, and something she had not felt since Richard threw her out. She had hope, fragile and new, but real. What Sarah did not know, what she could not have known, was that this hope was about to be tested in ways she could not imagine. Maggie Lawson's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square. The Legal Aid Society could not afford downtown real estate, so they made do with exposed brick walls, drafty windows, and desks that had been donated by a law firm that was upgrading to mahogany. Maggie herself was 34 years old, sharp-tongued, and perpetually furious. She had graduated top of her class at the University of Washington School of Law and had turned down 6-figure offers from corporate firms to work in legal aid because, as she told anyone who asked, somebody has to fight for the people who cannot afford a fight. She had handled dozens of financial abuse cases. She had seen husbands hide money in shell companies, in cryptocurrency, in their mothers' retirement accounts, in safe deposit boxes, rented under fake names. She had seen women left with nothing after 30-year marriages. She had seen prenups so predatory they should have been classified as weapons. But she had never seen anything like the Sterling case. When Sarah walked into her office, carrying a folder of documents and looking like she had not slept in a week, Maggie sat her down, poured her a glass of water, and said, "Tell me everything." Sarah told her. Maggie listened. She took notes on a yellow legal pad. She asked sharp, specific questions. When did you sign the prenup? Who was your attorney? Did Richard provide a full financial disclosure before you signed? What was his net worth at the time of signing? When Sarah described the eviction, the motel, the hospital, and the response from Conrad Archer's office, Maggie put down her pen. She stared at the wall for a full 10 seconds. This man is a monster, Maggie said, not to Sarah, but to the universe in general. Then she picked her pen back up. Let us get to work. Over the next week, Maggie and Sarah worked 18-hour days. David Torres, the forensic accountant assigned by the Women's Financial Justice Network, joined them on day 2. David was 41, quiet, patient, and devastatingly good with numbers. He had a background in forensic accounting for the IRS before leaving government work to volunteer with nonprofits helping abuse victims. He once told Maggie that tracing hidden money was like following a river upstream. You just keep going until you find the source. And the source always tells you who the person really is. maze of transfers and holding companies that Richard Sterling had built over 7 years to hide his true wealth. On day 4, David found the first thread. Blue Heron, LLC. It was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. On the surface, it looked like a standard offshore holding entity, the kind that thousands of wealthy Americans used for legitimate tax planning. But when David dug deeper, he found something that was not legitimate at all. Blue Heron LLC had purchased a commercial block in downtown Seattle 6 months ago. The purchase price was $6 million. The property was now valued at $7.2 million. Richard Sterling's financial disclosure to the court listed his total assets at $4 million. Blue Heron alone proved he was hiding at least triple that. "Sarah?" David said, looking up from his laptop with an expression that was half triumph and half disgust. "Your husband is a liar, but he is not a very good one." Over the next 3 days, David found a second entity, Redtail Holdings, another shell company, this one registered in Delaware, holding approximately $3 million in commercial real estate and investment accounts. Between Blue Heron and Redtail, Richard Sterling had hidden at least $9 million that he had sworn under oath did not exist. Maggie filed a countermotion to unfreeze Sarah's bank accounts, arguing that Richard's financial disclosures were fraudulent and that Sarah was being deliberately deprived of marital assets. She included David's preliminary findings as supporting evidence. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Real hope. Not the fragile flicker she had carried out of her father's chambers, but something stronger. Something with teeth. She went to a thrift store and bought a tiny yellow onesie for the baby. It had a small embroidered duck on the chest. She held it against her belly in the dressing room mirror and smiled. "You are going to be okay, little one," she whispered. "We both are." She was wrong. That night, Sarah's phone rang. It was Maggie. Her voice was flat. "Sarah, we have a problem." Conrad Archer, the man Richard called the Butcher of Bellevue, had done what butchers do. He had found a way to cut. 3 years ago, before joining the Legal Aid Society, Maggie had worked as a summer clerk at a mid-size law firm called Patterson and Grant. During that summer, Patterson and Grant had briefly represented Sterling Properties in an unrelated zoning matter. The representation lasted 6 weeks. Maggie was a clerk. She never saw a single Sterling document. She was assigned to a completely different case on the other side of the office. But Conrad Archer did not care about facts. He cared about technicalities. And the technicality was this. Maggie Lawson had been employed by a firm that had a prior attorney-client relationship with Sterling Properties. Under the strictest interpretation of conflict of interest rules, Maggie could not represent the opposing party in any matter involving Sterling Properties or its principal, Richard Sterling. Conrad filed an emergency motion. The motion was heard the next morning by a duty judge who had 40 cases on his docket and no time for nuance. He glanced at the filing, saw the words conflict of interest and prior representation, and granted the disqualification. Maggie was out. Sarah sat in Maggie's office as Maggie packed the case files into boxes. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "This is what he does," Maggie finally said, her voice tight with fury. "He does not win on the merits. He does not beat you with better arguments or better evidence. He removes the people who can beat him. He takes away your weapons before the fight even starts." "So what do I do now?" Sarah asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You represent yourself at the preliminary hearing," Maggie said. "I know that sounds terrifying, but listen to me. I cannot be your lawyer. The court has ruled. But I can be your friend. And friends talk on the phone. I can coach you. I can tell you what questions to ask. I can help you organize your evidence. I just cannot stand next to you in court. Sarah nodded. She picked up the yellow onesie from the chair where she had left it. She held it in both hands. Maggie watched her. Is that for the baby? Sarah nodded again. Then fight for that baby, Maggie said. Fight like your life depends on it. Because honestly, it does. Sarah walked out of the legal aid office into the Seattle rain. She was 7.5 months pregnant. She was alone again. She had a yellow onesie in one hand and a stack of legal documents she barely understood in the other. And she was going to walk into a courtroom in 5 days and face the butcher of Bellevue by herself. She should have been terrified, and she was. But beneath the terror, something else was growing. Something hard and bright and sharp. It was anger. Not the hot, explosive anger she had felt when Richard called her an obsolete asset. This was different. This was cold. This was the anger of a woman who had been lied to, stolen from, humiliated, and thrown away. The anger of a woman whose unborn child had been dismissed as not Mr. Sterling's financial concern. This anger did not burn. It froze. It crystallized. It became a blade. Sarah walked back to the motel. She spread the legal documents on the bed. She picked up her phone and called Maggie. Okay, Sarah said. Teach me everything. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was a cavernous tunnel of polished stone and echoing footsteps. At 8:45 on a Tuesday morning, it was already busy with lawyers and clerks and the occasional bewildered citizen trying to figure out which room to go to. Sarah sat on a hard wooden bench near the courtroom doors. She wore the navy blue suit she had bought at a consignment shop with part of her father's money. It was clean, tailored, and conservative. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun. She wore no makeup and no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she kept on because Maggie had told her it humanized her in front of a judge. Her hands were folded over her belly. The baby was quiet this morning, as if sensing that today was important and deciding to let its mother concentrate. Sarah's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She had spent the last 4 nights on the phone with Maggie until 2 in the morning, going over every document, rehearsing every question, anticipating every objection Conrad Archer might raise. She had index cards in her folder with bullet points written in neat block letters. She had David Torres's financial summary printed in triplicate. She had practiced her opening statement in front of the bathroom mirror until her voice stopped shaking. She was as ready as she could be, which was to say, she was terrified. The elevator doors at the end of the hall pinged. The sound of confident clicking heels echoed against the stone walls, followed by the heavier thud of expensive loafers. Then the smell hit her. Richard's heavy musk cologne and Jessica's clawing floral perfume, a combination so distinctive it was almost a weapon. Richard walked past without looking at her. He was talking to Conrad Archer about something involving a property in Bellevue, treating the hallway outside his own divorce hearing as if it were just another business meeting. Conrad walked beside him, briefcase in hand, his suit sharp enough to cut skin, but Jessica stopped. Jessica Vane was wearing a cream-colored pencil skirt and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Sarah's first car. Her hair was blown out. Her nails were fresh. She was wearing Sarah's grandmother's diamond earrings, and she was glowing with the particular radiance of a woman who believed she had already won. "You actually showed up," Jessica said, loud enough for the other people in the hallway to hear. She put a hand on her hip and tilted her head, the diamonds catching the fluorescent light. "I thought you would be sleeping off a hangover." Sarah took a slow breath. "Leave me alone, Jessica." "Or what?" Jessica stepped closer, invading Sarah's space. "You will cry? You will beg Richard to take you back? She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but kept it just loud enough for the nearest people to overhear. He hates you, you know. He talks about how pathetic you were, how boring, how you let yourself go. She glanced pointedly at Sarah's pregnant belly. Obviously, Sarah stood up. She was not going to sit there and take it. Not today. She moved to walk toward the courtroom doors, to escape the confrontation and preserve what was left of her composure. As Sarah tried to pass, Jessica shifted her weight. It was a subtle movement, practiced and precise, the kind of thing learned on middle school playgrounds and perfected in corporate boardrooms. She stuck her foot out just an inch, right in Sarah's path. Sarah's toe caught the heel of Jessica's designer shoe. At 7 months pregnant, Sarah's center of gravity was already precarious. The stumble became a fall before she could catch herself. She crashed forward, her arms flailing. Her knees hit the hard, stone floor with a sickening crack. Her belly struck the edge of the wooden bench she had been sitting on. The pain was immediate and electric, but it was nothing compared to the terror. The baby. Sarah's purse hit the ground and burst open, scattering pens and papers and her carefully organized index cards across the hallway floor. "Oh my God!" Jessica shrieked, her voice pitched to Carrie. "She attacked me. Did you see that?" She tried to shove me. Richard and Conrad turned around. Richard looked at Sarah on the floor, his 7 months pregnant wife on her hands and knees on a stone hallway, clutching her stomach, and his face showed nothing but disgust. "Get up, Sarah," Richard hissed. "Stop making a scene. Jesus, you are embarrassing yourself." "She tripped me," Sarah gasped. Her knee was screaming with pain. Her hand was pressed against her belly, desperately trying to feel the baby move. "Please, baby. Move. Please." Jessica looked down at her. For a split second, the mask slipped completely. Jessica's eyes were not the eyes of a 26-year-old intern. They were the eyes of something predatory and ancient. She smiled, a cruel, tight smile that was meant only for Sarah. Then she nudged Sarah's shin with the toe of her shoe, pushing her the way you would push a piece of garbage out of your path. "Stay down," Jessica whispered, so low that only Sarah could hear. "That is where you belong." "Hey," the booming voice came from the courtroom doors. Deputy Miller, the bailiff, strode into the hallway. He was a large man with a shaved head and arms like telephone poles. He took up a significant portion of the hallway simply by existing. "What is going on here?" Deputy Miller demanded. Conrad Archer stepped forward with the fluid ease of a man accustomed to controlling narratives. "She attacked my client's partner. We were walking to the courtroom, and Ms. Sterling lunged at Ms. Vane. She seems unstable. You can see she is on the ground." Deputy Miller looked at Sarah. He saw a pregnant woman on her knees, gathering scattered papers with shaking hands. He saw the tears of pain in her eyes. He saw the way she was cradling her belly. Then he looked at Jessica. Jessica was checking her nails. Deputy Miller had been a bailiff for 14 years. He had seen a lot of things in courthouse hallways. He knew what an attack looked like, and he knew what a trip looked like. He had seen Jessica's foot extend. He had seen the deliberate placement. He had seen the kick. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened, and he filed it away in the meticulous mental cabinet where he stored things that mattered. "Get inside," Deputy Miller said. "All of you. Judge is taking the bench in 2 minutes. Any more disturbances, and I am holding someone in contempt before the gavel even drops." Sarah limped into the courtroom. Her knee throbbed. Her belly ached with a dull, persistent pain that terrified her. But she did not go to the hospital. She could not. This hearing might be the only chance she had. She chose the table on the left, the defendant's table. It looked lonely. 1 chair, 1 pitcher of water. her small stack of files now slightly crumpled from the hallway floor. On the right, the plaintiff's table was a fortress. Richard sat in the center. Conrad Archer sat to his right. Two junior associates flanked them like soldiers, carrying boxes of documents, setting up laptops and binders and color-coded tabs. Behind them, in the first row of the gallery, Jessica Vane took her seat. She crossed her legs. She folded her hands. She looked like she was watching a show she had already seen the ending of. "All rise," Deputy Miller called. The courtroom stood. The case had been assigned to Judge Robert Henderson, Division B Family Court. Henderson was in his late 50s, competent and overwhelmed. He had 14 cases on his docket today. He was neither corrupt nor heroic. He was a man trying to do a difficult job with limited time and limited patience. He tended to defer to the more organized, more aggressive attorney in the room because it made his job easier. Today, that attorney was Conrad Archer. Conrad's opening statement was a masterclass in character assassination. He spoke without notes, pacing the floor, painting Sarah as an unstable, alcoholic spouse who had refused to work, refused to contribute to the household, and had recently spiraled into dangerous, erratic behavior. "Just this morning, Your Honor," Conrad said, his voice dripping with practiced concern, "Ms. Sterling physically assaulted Mr. Sterling's executive assistant in the hallway outside this courtroom. She lunged at her, unprovoked. It was witnessed by multiple parties." Sarah's stomach turned. She wanted to scream, but Maggie's voice echoed in her head. "Do not react. Do not interrupt. Your turn will come." Conrad concluded by asking for strict enforcement of the prenuptial agreement, a restraining order against Sarah, and an expedited settlement. Henderson turned to Sarah. "Ms. Sterling, your opening statement." Sarah stood up. Her legs trembled. Her knee burned. She looked at her notes, then put them down. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I do not have a fancy speech. I am not a lawyer. I am a woman who helped build a business. I signed the loans with my own credit when the bank said no. I did the books until 2 in the morning. I am the co-founder of Sterling Properties. My name is on the original incorporation papers filed with the state of Washington. I am not crazy. I am not a drunk. I am 7 months pregnant, and my husband froze my bank accounts and sent me to a motel with $12. All I want is what is fair." She sat down. Henderson looked mildly surprised. He made a note. The hearing proceeded. Sarah cross-examined Richard, using the questions Maggie had drilled into her. "If the company is losing money," Sarah asked, her voice gaining strength, "how did you afford the lease on the Obsidian Tower penthouse?" "It is $12,000 a month," Richard stammered. Conrad objected. Henderson sustained. Sarah pressed on. "Is Jessica Vane an employee of Sterling Properties? Her payroll record from 6 months ago shows she was an intern and earning $15 an hour. Last month, she received a wire transfer for $200,000. Can you explain that?" Richard's face turned red. He mumbled about consulting fees and client entertainment. Conrad objected again. Henderson sustained again. But Sarah had one more card to play. She introduced David Torres's one-page summary of Blue Heron LLC. She handed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "this document shows that a company called Blue Heron LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands, and connected to my husband through corporate filings, purchased a $6 million commercial property in downtown Seattle. My husband's financial disclosure to this court lists his total assets at $4 million. The numbers do not add up." Henderson studied the document. He frowned. He looked at Conrad. "Mr. Archer, this is concerning." "Your Honor, that is preliminary and unverified," Conrad said smoothly. "We have not had time to review this allegation." Then I suggest you review it, Henderson said. I am scheduling a follow-up hearing in 3 weeks. I want full financial documentation from both parties. 3 weeks. Sarah's heart sank. She would be over 8 months pregnant by then. But at least the judge had not dismissed the evidence. At least the door was still open. The hearing ended. Sarah gathered her papers and walked out of the courtroom on shaking legs. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and called Maggie. Maggie's voice was electric. You did incredible, Sarah. Henderson cannot ignore the shell company. David already found a second one called Red Tail Holdings. We have them. Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. A dangerous thing. Hope, it opens you up. It makes you vulnerable. It convinces you that maybe, just maybe, the worst is over. That night, Sarah bought a second-hand crib from a garage sale for $35. She set it up in the corner of the motel room. She hung the yellow onesie on the closet door. She lay on the bed with her hand on her belly, whispering to the baby, "We are going to be okay. Mommy promises we are going to be okay." But she was wrong, because 3 catastrophes were about to hit her in rapid succession, and the third one nearly killed her. The first catastrophe arrived without warning on a Monday morning, 1 week after the preliminary hearing. Judge Robert Henderson, the competent but overwhelmed jurist who had at least taken Sarah's evidence seriously, suffered a massive stroke at his home. He was found by his wife on the kitchen floor at 6:15 in the morning, the coffee maker still running, his briefcase packed for a day at the courthouse that he would never see. Henderson survived, but the damage was severe. He was placed on medical leave for a minimum of 6 months. All of his pending cases were reassigned through the court's standard rotation system. Sarah learned about it from a letter in the mail, a form letter printed on court letterhead informing her that case number 4-9201, Sterling versus Sterling, had been reassigned to the Honorable Franklin Morris, Division B Family Court. Sarah called Maggie immediately. Maggie was quiet for a long time. "Who is Judge Morris?" Sarah asked, not liking the silence. "He is semi-retired," Maggie said carefully. "He fills in when they need coverage. He is known for moving fast through his docket." "That sounds good," Sarah said. "It is not. Moving fast means he does not read the details. He does not dig. He looks at the surface and makes a decision. And Sarah, Conrad Archer has been playing golf with Franklin Morris for 15 years. The second hearing before Judge Morris confirmed Maggie's worst fears. Morris was in his late 60s, silver-haired, and perpetually bored. He spoke in a monotone. He checked his watch twice during Sarah's opening statement. When David Torres's financial analysis was presented showing the Blue Heron and Red Tail shell companies and their hidden millions, Morris glanced at the summary for approximately 4 seconds. "Mrs. Sterling, this court does not have time for fishing expeditions," Morris said. "If you have proof of hidden assets, present it at trial. Otherwise, let us talk settlement." Conrad Archer smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just been dealt a winning hand by the dealer he played poker with every Thursday. "Your Honor," Conrad said, "we respectfully ask the court to enforce the prenuptial agreement as written. The agreement provides Ms. Sterling with a settlement of $50,000. Morris looked at Sarah. He did not see a pregnant woman who had co-founded a company. He saw a case he wanted off his desk. "The court provisionally grants the motion," Morris said. "The prenup stands pending final trial. $50,000 from an $18 million estate." Richard Sterling smirked at the plaintiff's table. Jessica, sitting behind him in the gallery, gave Sarah a little wave, wiggling her fingers like a child saying goodbye. Sarah walked out of the courtroom feeling like she had been hit by a car. The second catastrophe came 3 days later. Richard had hired a private investigator. Sarah did not know this. She did not know that a man in a gray sedan had been following her for 2 weeks, photographing her movements, noting her locations, documenting her contacts. The investigator had photographed Sarah entering the Superior Court building on the day she visited her father's chambers. Conrad Archer did not know about the family connection. He did not know of that Justice Pendleton was Sarah's father, but the photograph was useful. Conrad filed a motion suggesting that Sarah Sterling was attempting to improperly influence the judiciary by making unexplained visits to the chambers of senior judges. The motion was vague and technically baseless, but it was designed to do two things. First, it put Sarah on the defensive. Second, it created a paper trail that could be used to challenge any favorable ruling Sarah received in the future. Arthur saw the filing. It crossed his desk in the daily court circulars, and when he read it, his blood ran cold. He called Sarah from a payphone outside the courthouse. It was the last time he would speak to her before the final hearing. "Do not come to the courthouse again," Arthur said. His voice was steady but strained. "Do not call my office. Do not mention my name to anyone. They are watching you, Sarah. They do not know who I am, but they are getting closer. If they connect us, everything falls apart. The entire case gets thrown out. Do you understand?" "I understand," Sarah said. Her voice was small. "Sarah, I know this is hard. I know you feel alone. But you have Maggie. You have David. You have yourself. That is enough. It has to be enough." He hung up. Sarah stood in the motel parking lot, holding the phone, staring at the rain. She was now cut off from her father again, not by anger or pride, but by necessity. The man who had given her the only lifeline she had was pulling it back, because holding on to it would drown them both. The third catastrophe was the worst. It came on a Wednesday night, 2 days before the next scheduled hearing. Sarah was lying in the motel bed, trying to sleep. The crib sat in the corner. The yellow onesie hung on the closet door. The faucet dripped its relentless rhythm. The pain started in her back. It moved to her abdomen. It tightened and squeezed and would not let go. Sarah knew this feeling. She had felt it before in the hospital 3 weeks ago. But this was worse. This was sharper. This was more insistent. She was 32 weeks pregnant, 8 weeks too early. She called 911 for the second time. At Harborview, Dr. Ramos was on call. When she saw Sarah being wheeled in, her professional composure cracked for just a moment. The look on her face said everything. Not again. The monitors showed premature contractions. The baby's heart rate was elevated but stable. Dr. Ramos administered medication to stop the contractions and started IV fluids. "Sarah," Dr. Ramos said, sitting beside her bed at 3 a.m, her voice gentle but firm. "I need to be very direct with you. Your body is shutting down from stress, the dehydration, the malnutrition, the cortisol levels, the fall in the hallway. All of it is cumulative. If you do not stop, if you do not find a way to reduce the pressure on your body, you will deliver this baby 2 months early. And at 32 weeks, there are real risks, real complication." "I cannot stop," Sarah whispered. "The hearing is in 2 days. Your baby's life is more important than a hearing." Sarah closed her eyes. She knew Dr. Ramos was right. But she also knew that if she did not fight now, there would be nothing left to fight for. Morris would finalize the prenup. Richard would walk away with everything. And Sarah would be raising a baby in a motel room with $50,000 that would run out before the child's first birthday. She was trapped between her baby's safety and her baby's future, and there was no good choice, only less terrible ones. The next morning, a courier arrived at the hospital. He was a young man in a polo shirt who looked uncomfortable being in a maternity ward. He handed Sarah an envelope and left without a word. Inside was a document from the law offices of Archer and Associates. It was a revised settlement offer, $25,000. Half of the already insulting $50,000. There was a handwritten note clipped to the front page. The note read, in Conrad Archer's precise handwriting, "Sign before the baby comes. You will need the money for diapers." Sarah held the document. Her hands shook. Tears fell onto the printed words, blurring the ink. The baby kicked against her ribs, a sharp, insistent kick, as if to say, I am here. I am real. Do not give up on me. For the first time, Sarah seriously considered signing, not because it was fair. It was the opposite of fair. It was theft dressed up in legal language. But she was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a baby who might come too early, and a body that was failing her. She was exhausted beyond anything she had ever imagined. She was alone. She was afraid. She picked up a pen from the bedside table. She stared at the signature line. The pen touched the paper, and the baby kicked again. Hard, right against Sarah's hand, as if reaching through skin and muscle to grab the pen and pull it away. Sarah put the pen down. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about Linda, the nurse who had paid her hospital bill and told her to fight. She thought about Maggie, who had said, "Fight like your life depends on it." She thought about her father, standing at his window, telling her to trust the system. She thought about her grandmother, Eleanor, who had survived the Depression and raised 3 children alone and wore those diamond earrings to church every Sunday as a reminder that beauty could exist even in hard times. Sarah picked up her phone. She did not call Maggie first. She called the courthouse. "I need to file a complaint," Sarah said. Her voice was steady. "Against a judge. Filing a formal complaint against a sitting judge from a hospital bed while experiencing premature contractions is not something they teach you in any class. There is no manual for it. There is no step-by-step guide." But Sarah had Maggie Lawson on the phone, and Maggie had been waiting her entire career for a moment like this. Maggie walked Sarah through every word. The complaint was filed with the State Judicial Conduct Commission, and it documented 3 things. First, Judge Morris's refusal to review verified financial evidence showing hidden assets. Second, his provisional enforcement of a prenuptial agreement without examining claims of fraud. Third, the 15-year personal and social relationship between Judge Morris and Conrad Archer, documented through country club membership records, golf tournament registrations, and photographs from charity galas that Maggie found with 30 minutes of internet research. The complaint was dry, factual, and devastating. It did not accuse Morris of corruption. It did not need to. It simply laid out a pattern that any reasonable person could see. A pattern of a judge who consistently favored attorneys in his social circle and rushed through cases that deserved careful examination. Sarah signed the complaint electronically from her hospital bed. Maggie filed it the same day. Arthur Pendleton knew nothing about it. He found out the same way everyone else did, through the court circulars 3 days later. He sat in his chambers and read the filing, and for the first time in 10 years he smiled. Not the cold, strategic smile of a judge, the proud, aching smile of a father. "She filed it herself," he murmured to the empty room. "She did not need me." Meanwhile, David Torres had not stopped working. From his small home office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts of corporate filings, David had found the third shell company, Cascade Ventures LLC, registered in Nevada, holding approximately $2 million in investment accounts and real property. The total hidden assets across all three shell companies, Blue Heron, Redtail Holdings, and Cascade Ventures, came to approximately $14 million. Combined with the assets Richard had disclosed, his true net worth was approximately $18 million. He had told the court he was worth $4 million. David prepared a forensic report that was 57 pages long. It included corporate formation documents, bank transfer records, property deeds, tax filings, and a timeline showing exactly when and how Richard had moved money into each shell company. The report was so clean, so thorough, and so methodical that any competent judge looking at it would have only one conclusion. Richard Sterling had committed systematic financial fraud. Maggie also made her own move. She filed a motion to overturn her disqualification as Sarah's attorney. The motion argued that Conrad Archer's original conflict of interest claim had been filed in bad faith. The facts were simple. Maggie's summer clerkship had been at a firm that represented Sterling Properties for exactly 6 weeks on a zoning matter. Maggie was a clerk assigned to a different case entirely. She never saw, touched, or discussed a single Sterling document. The conflict was manufactured. It was designed not to protect the integrity of the proceedings, but to deprive a destitute, pregnant woman of legal representation. The motion was filed to the reassignment panel, not to Judge Morris. Since Morris was now under investigation, Sarah was discharged from the hospital 4 days after filing the complaint. Dr. Ramos gave her strict instructions: bed rest, hydration, prenatal vitamins, no stress, no stress. Sarah almost laughed. She went back to the Starlight Motor Inn. She lay on the bed with the legal documents spread around her like a paper fortress. The crib sat in the corner. The yellow onesie hung on the closet door. The faucet dripped, and she waited. The Judicial Conduct Commission moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, Judge Franklin Morris was placed under administrative review. The investigation had uncovered not just the relationship with Conrad Archer, but a broader pattern of favorable rulings for attorneys in Morris's social circle. 3 other cases were flagged for review. Morris was temporarily removed from all active cases pending the outcome. The same week, the reassignment panel ruled on Maggie's motion. A different judge examined Conrad's original conflict of interest claim and found it tenuous at best and potentially filed in bad faith to deprive the defendant of counsel. Maggie's disqualification was overturned. Maggie Lawson was back. She walked into Sarah's motel room carrying a box of case files and a bag of takeout from the Thai place on Pike Street. "Get up, Sterling," Maggie said, setting the food on the dresser. "We have work to do." Sarah burst into tears. Not sad tears, relieved tears. The tears of someone who has been treading water alone for weeks and finally feels the bottom under her feet. They ate pad thai on the motel bed, surrounded by legal documents, and they worked until midnight. The case was reassigned through the standard rotation lottery. Neither Sarah nor Maggie had any input into which judge would receive it. Arthur Pendleton had nothing to do with it. The system, for once, worked exactly as it was designed to work. The case landed on the desk of Judge Patricia Hawthorne. Judge Hawthorne was 58 years old. She was a former federal prosecutor who had spent 15 years putting white-collar criminals in prison before being appointed to the bench. She was known for 3 things: meticulous attention to evidence, zero tolerance for attorney games, and an absolute, immovable refusal to be rushed. When Maggie heard the name, She nearly dropped her phone. Patricia Hawthorne, Maggie repeated, as if saying it again would make it more real. Who is she? Sarah asked. She is the judge that every honest lawyer hopes they will get, Maggie said, and every dishonest lawyer prays they will not. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and Maggie and David Torres transformed the motel room into a war room. The bed was covered in financial documents organized by Shell Company. David's forensic report was printed and tabbed. Witness statements were prepared, exhibits were numbered and cross-referenced. Their evidence was a fortress. 3 shell companies hiding $14 million. The original incorporation papers of Sterling Properties showing Sarah as co-founder and CFO. The fabricated evidence. The flu photos presented as alcoholism. The waiter paid $5,000 to sign a false assault affidavit. Dr. Ramos's medical report documenting that Sarah's pregnancy complications were directly caused by financial abuse and the hallway assault. And Deputy Miller's sworn statement describing exactly what he had seen in the hallway, Jessica Vane deliberately tripping a pregnant woman and kicking her while she lay on the floor. Arthur Pendleton knew the case had been reassigned. He read about Morris's suspension in the court circulars. He saw Judge Hawthorne's name on the new docket. He did not call Sarah. He did not send a message. He did not interfere in any way. He sat in his chambers alone, looking at the photograph of a smiling teenage girl, and he did the hardest thing a parent can do. He trusted his child to fight her own battle. Courtroom 7A was larger than Courtroom 4B, higher ceilings, better lighting, a sense of gravity that the smaller room lacked, as if the architecture itself understood that what happened here mattered. Sarah walked in at 8:30 in the morning. She was 8 months pregnant now. The navy suit still fit, barely. Maggie Lawson walked beside her, carrying a litigation bag stuffed with files and exhibits. Behind them, David Torres carried a laptop and a box of financial records. Sarah took her seat at the defendant's table. This time the table was not lonely. This time, she had Maggie on her right and David behind her. The pitcher of water was the same, but everything else had changed. On the plaintiff's side, Conrad Archer arranged his materials with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. 2 junior associates flanked him. Richard Sterling sat in the center, his charcoal suit impeccable, his face composed into an expression of wronged dignity. Behind Richard, in the front row of the gallery, Jessica Vane took her seat. She was wearing a Chanel blazer and Sarah's grandmother's diamond earrings. She crossed her legs and folded her hands and settled in to watch what she assumed would be the final act of Sarah's humiliation. In the last row of the gallery, unnoticed by anyone, an older man with silver hair sat down. He was not wearing a judicial robe. He wore a simple, dark overcoat. He carried a newspaper, which he did not read. He sat very still, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the back of his daughter's head. Arthur Pendleton was there as a private citizen, a father, nothing more. "All rise," Deputy Miller called. Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered the courtroom. She was tall, with short gray hair, and the kind of face that suggested she had never laughed at a joke she did not find genuinely funny. She wore her robe the way some people wear armor, as a statement of purpose. She sat down. She arranged her files with methodical precision. She looked at the plaintiff's table. She looked at the defendant's table. She did not smile. "Let us begin," Hawthorne said. Maggie's opening statement was the opposite of Conrad's theatrical performance. It was calm, factual, and devastating. She laid out the evidence in chronological order. The marriage, the business partnership, the prenup signed under false pretenses, the systematic erasure of Sarah from the company she co-founded, the eviction, the frozen accounts. the fabricated evidence, the shell companies, the hidden $14 million. Judge Hawthorne listened without interruption. She took notes. She did not check her watch. Conrad's opening was confident, but shorter than usual. He was not worried exactly, but he was cautious. Hawthorne was not Morris. She could not be charmed or rushed. The morning was devoted to financial evidence. David Torres took the stand as an expert witness and walked the court through his 57-page forensic report. He showed the corporate formation documents for Blue Heron, Redtail Holdings, and Cascade Ventures. He showed the bank transfers. He showed the property deeds. He showed how Richard Sterling had systematically moved money out of accounts Sarah could see and into entities she could not. Conrad objected 11 times during David's testimony. Hawthorne overruled 9 of them. Mr. Archer, Hawthorne said after the 9th objection, her voice flat and dry, if you object to verified financial records one more time, I will assume you are stalling, and I will draw the appropriate inference. Conrad sat down. Richard took the stand in the afternoon. Maggie cross-examined him. She was precise and relentless. Mr. Sterling, you told this court your total assets are $4 million. Is that correct? Richard shifted in his chair. That is what the financial disclosure reflects. Yes. Are you the beneficial owner of Blue Heron, LLC? I have interests in several holding companies. That is standard business practice. Blue Heron, LLC purchased a commercial property for $6 million. Where did the money come from? Various sources. I would have to check with my accountants. Your accountants did not list Blue Heron on your financial disclosure. Was that an oversight? It may have been. I have a complex portfolio. You have a complex portfolio, Maggie repeated, and yet you told this court you could not afford spousal support for your pregnant wife. You told this court your company was barely breaking even. Is Sterling Properties barely breaking even, Mr. Sterling? While you maintain a $12,000 a month penthouse and wire $200,000 to your executive assistant? Richard's face turned a shade of purple that was not healthy. Conrad started to stand. I will handle this, Conrad, Richard snapped. Then he turned to Maggie and made the mistake that narcissists always make. He lost his temper. Sterling Properties is my company, Richard said, his voice rising. I built it. I took the risks. Sarah signed some papers and did some bookkeeping. That does not make her a co-founder. She was my wife. She supported me. That is what wives do. The courtroom went quiet. Several women in the gallery shifted in their seats. Maggie let the silence hang for 5 full seconds. Then she said, very quietly, so your testimony is that your wife's contribution to the company she co-founded with you, whose name appears on the state incorporation filing as co-founder and chief financial officer, is equivalent to being your support staff? Richard started, then stopped. He realized what he had said. He looked at Judge Hawthorne. Hawthorne was looking at him over her reading glasses, and her expression suggested she had already made up her mind about the kind of man he was. No further questions, Maggie said. Then it was Jessica's turn. Maggie called Jessica Vane to the stand. Conrad tried to block it. Your Honor, Ms. Vane is not a party to this case. Hawthorne looked at him. Ms. Vane received $200,000 from your client during the marriage. If she received marital assets, she is a material witness. Overruled. Take the stand, Ms. Vane. Jessica walked to the witness stand. She treated the aisle like a runway. She tossed her hair over her shoulder and sat down with the practiced grace of someone who had spent her entire life performing for an audience. She smiled at the court reporter. She adjusted the microphone, but then Sarah stood up. Your Honor, I would like to cross-examine the witness myself, the courtroom murmured. Hawthorne looked at Maggie. Maggie nodded. My client has a right to confront the witness directly, Your Honor. Hawthorne studied Sarah for a moment. Then she nodded. Proceed, Mrs. Sterling. Sarah walked slowly toward the witness stand. Her belly led the way. She was 8 months pregnant and exhausted, and her knee still ached from the fall in the hallway weeks ago. She did not look powerful. She did not look like a lawyer. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had been pushed to the edge and had decided to push back. Jessica watched her approach. The thin smile was still in place, but something flickered behind Jessica's eyes. A flicker of uncertainty. Because Sarah did not look afraid anymore, and that was new. Jessica, Sarah said, her voice steady, you testified at the preliminary hearing that the $200,000 you received from Richard was a loan for your mother's surgery. Is that correct? Yes. Jessica's voice was soft and breathy. My mother is very sick. It is hard for me to talk about. I understand, Sarah said. It must be very difficult, especially since your mother, Barbara Vane, passed away in November of 2023. She reached into her folder and produced a single sheet of paper. Obituary from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Exhibit 9. The courtroom went silent. The kind of silence that has weight. Jessica's face drained of color. I meant my stepmother, Jessica stammered. I call her Mom. We are very close. What is her name? Sarah asked. Linda Jones. Sarah nodded. There is no Linda Jones in any of Richard's financial records, your personal records, your tax filings, or your family records. We checked. Would you like to try again? Jessica's lip trembled. Her eyes darted to Richard. Richard was staring at the table. Let us move on, Sarah said. Let us talk about something we can all see. Those earrings you are wearing, antique cut, 1.5 carats each. They are beautiful. Where did you get them? Jessica instinctively reached up and touched the diamonds. Richard gave them to me. For my birthday. Sarah turned to face the judge directly. She looked Judge Hawthorne in the eye. Your Honor, those earrings belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor Bennett. They were left to me in her will. Exhibit 14 contains the will, the appraisal certificate, and insurance photographs from 1997. Those earrings were in a safe in our marital home, a safe my husband emptied before he evicted me. In the back row of the gallery, Arthur Pendleton stopped breathing. He had bought those earrings with his first paycheck as a lawyer 40 years ago. He had given them to his mother, who wore them to church every Sunday for 30 years. When his mother died, she left them to Sarah in her will. They were not just jewelry. They were the legacy of a family that Jessica Vane knew nothing about, and Richard Sterling had never cared to learn about. Arthur looked at Jessica Vane wearing his mother's earrings, and his hands gripped the bench in front of him until his knuckles turned white. But he did not move. He did not speak. He was not a judge in this room. He was just a father, watching. Hawthorne examined Exhibit 14. She compared the photographs to the earrings Jessica was wearing. Her expression hardened. Ms. Vane, Hawthorne said, you are wearing property that the plaintiff claims was stolen from the marital estate. I am ordering you to surrender those earrings to the court clerk immediately as potential evidence in this proceeding. No, Jessica blurted. They are mine, Richard said. What exactly did Richard say? Sarah asked. Her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade made of ice, and Jessica broke. It did not happen slowly. It happened all at once, like a dam that had been holding back a reservoir of lies and fear and selfishness for years. One crack, and the whole thing came down. He said you were trash, Jessica screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. He said you deserved nothing. He said you were stupid and boring and pathetic. He said the judge was a senile old fool and we would be done in an hour. He said he owned the system. He said no one would believe you because you were just a crazy, pregnant woman with no money and no lawyer and no family. Richard shot to his feet. "Shut up, Jessica. You shut up," Jessica screamed back, mascara running down her face in black rivers. "You promised me. You said she would sign. You said she was too stupid to fight. You said we would be in Italy by September. You said you were going to marry me." I said, "Sit down and shut your mouth," Richard roared. "You told me to lie. You told me what to say about the money. You told me to wear the earrings to make her jealous. You told me to trip her in the hallway. You told me to—" "Enough," Judge Hawthorne said. Her gavel cracked like a rifle shot. But Jessica was beyond control. She was spiraling, years of careful calculation collapsing into raw, ugly panic. She looked at Sarah standing there in front of her, calm and pregnant and dignified and winning. And something inside Jessica that had always been cruel and always been weak and always been terrified snapped like a dry twig. Jessica launched herself off the witness stand. She grabbed Sarah by the hair with both hands and yanked her backward. Sarah screamed. Jessica clawed at her face, her nails raking across Sarah's cheek. "You ruined everything," Jessica shrieked, her voice raw and animal. "You were supposed to be nothing. You were supposed to disappear." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Someone in the gallery screamed. Conrad Archer jumped to his feet. The court reporter's hands froze over her keys. "Bailiff," Judge Hawthorne shouted, slamming the gavel again and again. "Restrain that woman now." Deputy Miller was already moving. He had been watching Jessica since the hallway weeks ago, and he had been waiting for this moment the way a goalkeeper waits for a penalty kick, already knowing which direction to dive. He crossed the courtroom in 3 strides. He caught Jessica's wrist, broke her grip on Sarah's hair, and pinned her against the witness stand with one arm. Jessica was still kicking, still screaming, her Chanel blazer torn at the shoulder, her mascara streaming. Sarah stumbled backward. Her hand went to her belly. Her cheek was bleeding from 3 parallel scratches. Her hair was pulled loose and hanging in her face, but her eyes were clear, and she was standing. In the back row of the gallery, Arthur Pendleton was on his feet. His face was white. His fists were clenched at his sides. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to vault over the gallery railing and put himself between his daughter and that woman. He was a 68-year-old man, and he would have done it without hesitation. But he did not, because if he revealed himself in this courtroom, if anyone knew that a senior justice of the state superior court was the defendant's father, it would give Conrad Archer grounds for appeal. It could taint the case. It could undo everything Sarah had fought for, everything she had built from a hospital bed with a phone in one hand and her baby under the other. So Arthur stood there, shaking, watching, a father forced to watch Shibet, his pregnant daughter, be attacked by a screaming woman and do absolutely nothing. It was the hardest moment of his entire life, harder than his wife's death, harder than the 10 years of silence, harder than anything he had faced in 40 years on the bench. Deputy Miller handcuffed Jessica. She was sobbing now, the rage collapsing into self-pity the way it always did with people like her. "I did not do anything. She made me. Richard told me to. It is not my fault." Deputy Miller hauled her toward the side door. As Jessica passed Richard's table, she looked at him with the wild eyes of a drowning person. "Tell them, Richard. Tell them you told me to do it. Tell them." Richard did not look at her. He stared at the table. The door slammed shut. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Sarah's breathing and the faint scratch of the court reporter's keys catching up. Catching up. Judge Hawthorne let the silence hold for a count of 10. Then she spoke. "Ms. Vane is under arrest for assault and battery in my courtroom on a pregnant woman. The charges will be filed with the district attorney's office by end of business today." Her voice was ice, pure, absolute, unbending ice. She turned to Conrad Archer. Mr. Archer, your client's companion has just committed a felony in front of a sitting judge, a bailiff, a court reporter, and a gallery full of witnesses. Your client's financial disclosures are demonstrably fraudulent. Your client's evidence against his wife appears to have been fabricated. The waiter who signed the assault affidavit received a $5,000 wire from your client's personal account 2 days before signing. Is there anything else you would like to present to this court, or shall I issue my ruling? Conrad Archer looked at the wreckage around him. He looked at Richard, who was still staring at the table. He looked at the gallery, where every face was a mask of horror or fascination, or both. Then he did something he had never done in his entire career. He closed his briefcase. He leaned over to Richard and whispered 5 words. I am withdrawing as your counsel. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He nodded to the judge, the bare minimum of professional courtesy, and he walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The door closed behind him. Richard Sterling sat alone at the plaintiff's table. No lawyer, no mistress, no associates, no allies. Just a man in a $5,000 suit, surrounded by the smoldering ruins of every lie he had ever told. Judge Hawthorne took her time. She did not rush. She did not summarize. She went through every piece of evidence methodically, referencing exhibits by number, citing specific findings from David Torres's forensic report, quoting testimony from the transcript. It was a performance of judicial precision that would later be cited in law school textbooks as an example of how to issue a ruling in a complex financial abuse case. The courtroom was silent. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table, with his hands flat on the wood, as if trying to hold himself steady against a current that was pulling him under. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, with Maggie on one side and her hand on her belly on the other. In the back row, Arthur Pendleton leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the judge. This court has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, Judge Hawthorne began, and I must be frank. In my years on this bench, I have rarely seen a case involving such systematic deception, such deliberate cruelty, and such flagrant abuse of the legal process. She looked at Richard. Mr. Sterling, you submitted a financial disclosure to this court swearing that your total assets were approximately $4 million. The forensic evidence presented today reveals that you are the beneficial owner of at least 3 shell companies, Blue Heron LLC, Redtail Holdings, and Cascade Ventures, collectively holding approximately $14 million in real estate and investments that you did not disclose. This is not an oversight. This is fraud. Richard did not move. Furthermore, Hawthorne continued, this court has reviewed the prenuptial agreement upon which you rely. That agreement was signed based on financial representations that were, at best, materially incomplete and, at worst, deliberately fraudulent. The law is clear. A prenuptial agreement obtained through misrepresentation is voidable. This court hereby declares the prenuptial agreement null and void. Sarah let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Regarding the division of assets, Hawthorne continued, the evidence establishes that Mrs. Sterling was not merely a spouse who supported the household. She was the co-founder of Sterling Properties. Her name appears on the original state incorporation filing as co-founder and chief financial officer. She signed the business loans that launched the company. She managed the finances during its critical early years. The fact that Mr. Sterling subsequently removed her from the company's public profile and board of directors does not erase her foundational contribution. Hawthorne turned a page. Given the totality of the circumstances, including the severity of the financial fraud, the systematic concealment of marital assets, the fabrication of evidence against the defendant, the abuse of the legal process to deprive the defendant of counsel, and the physical and emotional abuse documented by medical records and witness testimony, this court awards the defendant, Sarah Bennett Sterling, 65% of all marital and hidden assets. Based on the forensic accounting presented, this equates to approximately $11.7 million. Richard flinched. It was the first visible reaction he had shown since Conrad walked out. Hawthorne was not finished. Additionally, this court issues an emergency protective order for Mrs. Sterling and her unborn child. Mr. Sterling is prohibited from contacting Mrs. Sterling directly or through intermediaries, from approaching within 500 feet of her residence, and from making any financial transactions involving marital assets pending final distribution. Furthermore, this court is referring all evidence of wire fraud, tax evasion, perjury, witness tampering, and fabrication of evidence to the United States Attorney's Office for Federal Criminal Investigation. This court does not have jurisdiction over criminal matters, but I will note for the record that the evidence before me suggests conduct that warrants serious prosecutorial attention. Finally, Mr. Sterling's passport is hereby confiscated and his domestic assets frozen pending the federal investigation. Hawthorne set down her papers. She looked at Sarah. Mrs. Sterling, this court recognizes what you have endured: the financial abuse, the fabricated evidence, the physical assault on your person while pregnant. These are not merely legal violations. They are acts of cruelty, and this court does not take them lightly. Sarah nodded. She did not cry. She had done enough crying in courtrooms. Hawthorne looked at Richard one final time. Mr. Sterling, let me offer you a piece of unsolicited wisdom. You have spent the last 7 years treating people as assets to be acquired and discarded. You treated your wife as an obsolete model. You treated the law as a suggestion. You treated this court as a rubber stamp for your convenience. The law is patient, Mr. Sterling, but it is not weak. And today, it remembers what you forgot, that every person you step on while climbing the ladder might be the one holding it steady. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time. Richard was escorted out by 2 officers. He was not handcuffed. The matters before him were civil, and the criminal investigation had not yet produced charges. But his passport was gone, his assets were frozen, and his lawyer had abandoned him. As Richard walked up the aisle toward the courtroom doors, he passed Sarah's table. He stopped. He looked at her belly, then at her face. His expression was not remorse. Narcissists do not feel remorse. It was the cold, calculating fury of a man who had been beaten and would spend the rest of his life convincing himself it was someone else's fault. This is not over, Richard said quietly. I will be out in 3 years, and I will remember this. Sarah looked him in the eye. Her hand rested on her belly. Her cheek still bore the scratches from Jessica's nails. She did not flinch. She did not look away. And I will be ready, she said. Deputy Miller took Richard's arm. Firmly, not roughly, but with the unmistakable authority of a man who had watched a pregnant woman get kicked on a hallway floor and had been waiting weeks for this moment. Time to go, Mr. Sterling, Miller said. Richard was led through the doors. They swung shut behind him. Sarah sat at the defendant's table for a long time after the courtroom emptied. Maggie sat next to her. David Torres gathered his files quietly. The court reporter packed up her equipment. Judge Hawthorne had returned to her chambers. The room was still. The afternoon light came through the high windows and fell across the empty gallery in long, warm rectangles. You did it, Maggie said softly. We did it, Sarah corrected. All of us. Maggie shook her head. You filed that complaint from a hospital bed, Sarah. You represented yourself at the first hearing. You cross-examined Jessica Vane while 8 months pregnant with scratches on your face. You did this. Own it. Sarah pressed her hand to her belly. The baby was calm now, settled, as if she knew the fighting was over. They gathered their things and walked out of the courtroom into the long stone hallway. The hallway was mostly empty. Afternoon session had not yet begun, and the morning crowd had dispersed. The stone floor gleamed under fluorescent lights. Rain streaked the tall windows at the far end. Sarah stopped. She saw him. At the end of the hallway, standing by the tall windows where the Seattle rain painted streaks of gray light across the stone, was an older man with silver hair. He was not wearing a robe. He wore a simple, dark overcoat. He looked like any other visitor to the courthouse. An older gentleman waiting for someone, an uncle, a neighbor, a nobody. But Sarah knew him the way you know the sound of your own heartbeat. She turned to Maggie. "Give me a minute." Maggie looked down the hallway. She saw the older man. She did not know who he was, but she had worked enough cases to know when someone needed a private moment. "Take your time," Maggie said. "I will be in the lobby." Sarah walked down the hallway. Her steps were slow. Her hand was on her belly. Her eyes were blurring. Each step echoed against the stone, and each echo sounded like a year. 10 steps, 10 years. 10 years of silence and stubbornness and regret. Arthur watched her come. He stood very still, the way he stood when he was on the bench, and the weight of a verdict was settling onto his shoulders. But his chin trembled. He did not try to hide it. Sarah reached him. They stood face to face, father and daughter. The space between them was not just physical. It was a decade wide, filled with words that should have been said and words that should not have been said, and a silence so long it had become its own kind of language. "Daddy," Sarah whispered. Arthur pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, but carefully, his arms encircling her shoulders, mindful of the belly between them that held his grandchild. He held her the way he had held her when she was 6 and fell off her bicycle and skinned both knees and cried like the world was ending. The way he held her when she was 12 and a girl at school said something cruel. The way he held her when she was 17 and she told him she wanted to be a lawyer just like him, and his heart had been so full he thought it might actually burst. "I am so proud of you," Arthur said. His voice was thick, with 10 years of unshed tears. "You did not need me, Sarah. You did this yourself." "I needed you," Sarah said into his shoulder. "I just did not know it for 10 years. They stood there in the hallway, holding each other, as courthouse staff and attorneys walked past. Nobody looked twice. It was just an old man hugging a pregnant woman by a rain-streaked window. Nothing remarkable, nothing newsworthy, just a father and a daughter finding their way back. But one person noticed. Richard Sterling was being escorted through the corridor toward the processing area. His hands were not cuffed, not yet, but an officer walked on either side of him. As they rounded the corner near the tall windows, Richard glanced to his left. He saw Sarah in the arms of an older man. Silver hair, dark overcoat. He almost looked away. He had no interest in Sarah's personal life. She was already fading from his mind, replaced by the more immediate concerns of frozen assets and federal investigations. But something stopped him. The silver hair, the posture, the way the man held his shoulders, even in a simple coat, with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to commanding a room. Richard had seen that man before. He had seen him earlier today, in the back row of the gallery, reading a newspaper, watching the proceedings with unusual intensity. And before that, Richard's mind flicked through images like a Rolodex. The courthouse hallway. The brass nameplates outside the judge's chambers on the 4th floor. He had walked past them dozens of times during this case, back when Conrad was still his lawyer, and they would stroll the halls between hearings, Conrad pointing out which judges were friendly and which were hostile. One nameplate, 4th floor. 3rd door on the right, Justice Arthur Pendleton. The iron gavel. Richard stopped walking. The officer on his left said, "Keep moving, Mr. Sterling." But Richard did not move. He stared at the scene by the window. He watched Sarah pull back from the embrace. He watched the older man take Sarah's face in both hands the way a father holds a child he loves more than his own life. He watched the resemblance emerge, like a photograph developing in chemical solution, the jawline, the set of the eyes, the way they both tilted their heads slightly to the left when listening. The nobody, the insignificant public sector lawyer named Arthur Bennett, the father-in-law Richard had dismissed with a laugh and a wave and a single word. Nobody. That nobody was a senior justice of the State Superior Court of Washington. Everything Richard had said about Sarah's family, every assumption he had made, every dismissal, every sneer, came rushing back. He had told Jessica that Sarah's father was dead or irrelevant. He had told Conrad the same. He had never checked. He had never asked. Because Richard Sterling did not investigate the people he considered beneath him. And that, in the end, was how he lost everything. Richard's mouth opened. He wanted to scream. He wanted to march over to that window and shout that this was corruption, that the judge's father, that the whole case was rigged. But even in his rage, even in his narcissistic certainty that the world had conspired against him, a small, rational voice in the back of his mind told him the truth. Arthur Pendleton had not presided over the case, had not ruled on it, had not interfered. The judge who had just taken everything from Richard was Patricia Hawthorne, who had no connection to the Pendleton family whatsoever. Arthur had been in the gallery as a spectator, nothing more. There was no misconduct, no conflict, no grounds for appeal. The system had worked. The right judge had heard the evidence. The evidence was overwhelming. And Richard Sterling had been beaten not by conspiracy, but by the truth. Richard did not say a word. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The knowledge settled into him like slow poison, and it would stay there, rotting, for every night of every year he spent in a federal prison cell. The officers guided him around the corner. He did not look back. Arthur and Sarah never saw him staring. They were not thinking about Richard Sterling anymore. They had more important things to discuss. Like the name of the baby. Arthur looked down at Sarah's belly. "When is she due?" "November." "She? You know?" Sarah smiled. "She is a girl, Dad. I want to name her Eleanor, after Grandma." Arthur's face changed. The iron gavel crumbled. The legendary jurist who had reduced attorneys to tears with a single question pressed his lips together and blinked rapidly and failed entirely to stop the tears from running down his weathered face. "Eleanor," he repeated, "that is perfect." They stood by the window for a long time. Jim, watching the rain. Then Arthur took Sarah's arm, and they walked out of the courthouse together into the gray Seattle afternoon, into the rest of their lives. The aftermath unfolded over the following year like dominoes falling in slow, satisfying succession. Richard Sterling pleaded guilty to 4 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of tax evasion. His lawyers, the new ones he hired after Conrad walked out, advised him to take the deal. The alternative was a trial that would have lasted weeks and resulted in a sentence twice as long. Richard received 7 years in federal prison. He filed 2 appeals. Both were denied. He requested a meeting with Sarah through his prison counselor. Sarah declined. The man who once owned half of downtown Seattle now earned 40 cents an hour working in the prison commissary. He sat in the visiting room every Sunday, waiting for someone who never came. Conrad Archer was disbarred by the State Bar Association for suborning perjury, fabricating evidence, and filing motions in bad faith. His law firm collapsed within 3 months. His wife, who had spent 20 years watching Conrad destroy other people's marriages, filed for divorce using the same aggressive legal strategies her husband had perfected. She hired a woman from the Legal Aid Society who had studied Conrad's playbook and used every one of his tactics against him. Last anyone heard, Conrad was selling his house in Bellevue to cover legal fees. Judge Franklin Morris was removed from the bench following the Judicial Conduct Commission's investigation. The review uncovered not just his relationship with Conrad Archer, but a systematic pattern of favorable rulings for attorneys in his social circle, spanning more than a decade. 3 other cases were reopened. Morris retired quietly to Arizona. No one threw him a farewell party. Jessica Vane pleaded no contest to assault on a pregnant woman and conspiracy to conceal marital assets. She received 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. She moved back to her hometown outside Cleveland, Ohio. She works at a department store. She tells her coworkers she used to be an executive in Seattle. She does not mention the earrings. Deputy Miller left the courthouse 6 months after the trial. Sarah hired him as head of security for her foundation. He still does not talk much, but every woman who walks through those doors knows that the big quiet man at the front desk is watching out for them. Maggie Lawson was promoted to senior counsel at the Legal Aid Society. She won 3 more high-asset financial abuse cases in the following year, each one building on the precedents established in Sterling versus Sterling. She and Sarah have lunch every Thursday. David Torres published a paper on forensic methods for tracing hidden assets in domestic abuse cases. The paper was adopted as training material by 3 state bar associations and the National Network to End Domestic Violence. He received a commendation from the Department of Justice. Dr. Helen Ramos delivered baby Eleanor Pendleton Sterling on a clear November morning, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, healthy, screaming her lungs out, perfect. Sarah did not keep Sterling properties. She sold the company's assets, the commercial buildings, the penthouse lease, the development projects. After taxes, legal fees, and the settlement, she cleared approximately $9 million. She used the money to start the Bennett Initiative, named after the family name she had carried since childhood. The foundation provides 3 things to women trapped in financial abuse: free legal representation, forensic accounting services, and emergency housing for women and children who have been evicted from their homes with nothing. The Bennett Initiative operates out of a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square, 3 blocks from Maggie Lawson's legal aid office. The front desk is staffed by a large, quiet man named Deputy Miller, who never smiles but makes every woman who walks through the door feel safe. 1 year later, a rainy Tuesday in Seattle. It was always a rainy Tuesday in Seattle. The city seemed to specialize in them. Sarah walked into a small coffee shop near the courthouse. She was wearing a simple raincoat and her grandmother's diamond earrings. The earrings had been returned to her by the court clerk 4 months after the trial, sealed in an evidence bag, and Sarah had put them on and not taken them off since. They felt like armor. They felt like history. They felt like Eleanor. Baby Eleanor was in a stroller, sleeping with her fist curled around a stuffed rabbit that Maggie had given her. She was 1 year old now, with dark hair and her grandmother's cheekbones and her grandfather's stubborn jawline. At a corner table, an older man with silver hair sat reading a newspaper. A cup of black coffee sat untouched in front of him. He had arrived 20 minutes early as he always did, because Arthur Pendleton was constitutionally incapable of being late for anything. Your Honor, Sarah smiled. Sitting down across from him, Arthur looked up. His eyes went to the baby first. They always went to the baby first. His entire face softened. The iron gavel, the terror of unprepared attorneys, the legend of the state bench dissolved completely. In his place was a grandfather, just a grandfather, looking at his granddaughter with the uncomplicated adoration that grandparents have perfected since the beginning of time. I told you, Arthur said. Outside the courtroom, it is just Dad. Old habits, Sarah laughed. Eleanor woke up. She blinked at the fluorescent lights. She looked around the coffee shop with the wide, curious eyes of a child seeing the world for the first time every single day. Then she saw the man across the table. She reached out with tiny fingers. Arthur took her hand. Her entire fist wrapped around his index finger and held on with a grip that was surprisingly strong. She has your mother's eyes, Arthur said quietly. Sarah reached across the table and took his other hand. The three of them sat there for a moment, connected by touch. 3 generations of a family that had been broken and mended and was stronger at the broken places. Lunch is on me today, Sarah said. I think I can afford it. Arthur squeezed her hand. His eyes were bright. I am just glad you can afford to smile again. They sat there for hours, not talking about law or money or Richard Sterling or shell companies or prenuptial agreements, talking about Eleanor's first tooth coming in, about the foundation's new office downtown, about whether Arthur would finally retire next year and teach Eleanor to fish at the lake house in the San Juan Islands, about what kind of cake to have at Eleanor's first birthday party, about nothing, about everything. On Sarah's wrist, beneath the sleeve of her raincoat, she wore a simple silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside, in letters small enough that you would have to look closely to read them, were 3 initials. E.P.S. Eleanor Pendleton Sterling. 2 bloodlines, 2 last names, 1 family, broken apart by pride and put back together by something stronger. Outside, the Seattle rain kept falling. It fell on the courthouse, where justice had been served. It fell on the motel where Sarah had spent her darkest nights. It fell on the prison in Oregon, where Richard Sterling stared at concrete walls. It fell on the coffee shop window, running in silver streaks, blurring the world outside into something soft and impressionistic. But inside, it was warm. Sarah Sterling had learned the hardest lesson the hard way. Money cannot buy loyalty, power cannot buy love, and the most expensive lawyers in the world cannot protect you from the truth. But she had also learned something that most people never do, something beautiful and terrible and worth every tear she had ever shed. The people who truly love you will wait, even if it takes 10 years, even if you told them you hated them, even if you slammed every door and changed every lock and said every cruel thing you could think of to drive them away. They will still be there when you finally knock. Richard Sterling lost everything because he made the oldest mistake in the book. He confused kindness for weakness. He thought Sarah was stupid because she was trusting. He thought she was helpless because she was gentle. And he never, not once in 7 years of marriage, bothered to find out who raised her. Because if he had, he would have known. You do not mess with a wolf's cub while the alpha is watching. What do you think? Did Richard get what he deserved? Would you have forgiven your father after 10 years of silence? And what would you have done if you were Sarah, lying in that hospital bed with a pen in your hand and a settlement offer for $25,000? Would you have signed? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in karma. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because next week's story is even wilder. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.